All right.
Are we a quorum?
We are a quorum, so we will call to order this meeting of the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, April 17th, 2018. We have a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Get any minutes to approve this meeting?
No, because we didn't have the last meeting because it was town meeting.
Do we have any leftovers?
Nope, we got them all done.
All right. With the short board, shall we attempt election of officers? Anybody have any
Nominations are
objections to
open.
that? Nominations are open.
I would nominate Mr. Lowell for chair.
Second.
Just
I'll accept the nomination.
Okay. Someone has to say all in favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
It was easy.
More nominations.
If you wouldn't mind, Ginger, I nominate you for vice chair. And I'll say this, and you can ask Fritz, I think only once in the year did Fritz have to stand in for Andy. If at all.
And I can't even remember that. It may have been at a part.
Andy has excellent.
Thanks.
Well, I would just warn you that when I was chairman of the Conservation Commission, I did let people talk too long. I will try to be better on this one, but I'll accept if you agree.
I nominated, so someone has to second.
I'll second the nomination. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll nominate Peter Brace as secretary.
I'll accept that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can I just say, that's the first time I've sat through a lot of meetings like this where someone has willingly accepted a nomination as secretary in the first round.
I'm so used to it, and I've got the minutes down to a science, and I'm so used to, Andy and I have a good working relationship for creating the agenda, and he doesn't do email, but he does do text, and I know the ladies in the town clerk's office, and I got my system, so yeah.
It's just nice to see. Usually secretaries like pulling teeth to get some of the minutes.
Well, my minutes are kind of long-winded sometimes, but at least they're thorough.
It's all right. They're approved. That's it.
Fritz, thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice chairman the past year.
You're welcome. It was an arduous year, but we survived. Thank you.
Well, we certainly appreciate your presence here. So thank you.
You're going to need the extra time.
Sheila tonight is busy with some volunteers from high school students helping her do some cleanup. So I can't blame her for taking advantage of this lovely weather outside. Moving on to natural resources. Jeff, please.
Sure. I'll try to be brief because there's a lot of other stuff that's more interesting later to talk about. The hatchery itself is kind of up and running. Our algae production is kind of at full speed ahead at this point. We're starting to hold condition animals. We have our first seasonal that started. Dave Barry's back with us for seemingly his fifth or sixth season with us now, so it's been kind of seamless for him. So we're hoping, I think, to get our first production run kind of underway here. I know when I last talked to Tara, we're hoping to get everything a little bit warmer. It's still pretty chilly. Water's still pretty cold. Obviously, the outside's still pretty cold. So hopefully that'll be up and running. And then another good news, we'll be doing our second round of interviews for the full-time hatchery technician. They're trying to schedule those for later this week. So hopefully we'll have an additional full-time person down there to help out here in the next month or so, depending on how offers go out, if people accept it for timing for them to move or to leave a position and go. We don't want to actually ask someone to do something that's unprofessional. So hopefully that'll be soon. So that's kind of the big events at the hatchery. Water quality-wise, our programming for that starts in next month. We did complete the regularly scheduled pond openings. I know that's something that's later on the agenda for jurisdictional questions for you guys, but that is something that was completed for Hundick and Sacajawea earlier this month. As I said, our regular testing starts here in May for the harbors and the Great Ponds and the streams and all those things that start up. The 2017 report finally got its edits back, so that'll hopefully be up and available for everyone in the public tomorrow. Just to link that out to communities like that for people to see.
What report is that, Jeff?
It's the Island water quality report.
Oh, water
It's the report that we send our samples off to SMAS. They provide us some data analysis, and then they provide us some kind of long-term trends. And kind of long-term, we're moving towards more of a direction now that we have a lot of staff and expertise on islands, having them process the data, and instead of necessarily telling us what to do, to get the data back and some trends for us to have the discussion about, well, what do we think we should be doing, and then how can we actually implement that to reality, instead of them just saying, well, first things first is to do more testing to keep us employed. Second is to do these things, is to go through and really prioritize on island what we're going to be doing. Our staff, DPW, on Comet, Public Health, towards like here, the Conservation Commission, and we'll be more involved. So to get more of a on-island approach to it, we need to bring in expertise or consultants to come in and come talk to us about options to really take more ownership and control of that process instead of just getting, here's the bullet list of things that we think we should be doing, about trying to implement these to really drive that list ourselves. So that's kind of coming. We've kind of been pointing to this for a while, so it's nice to kind of getting there. Other things going on, harbor-wise, I always hate to say this way, but fertilizer season is technically here by date. We've definitely been encouraging everyone to delay applications as long as possible, just for the fact that our soil temperatures are not in the range where really anything would be using fertilizer. I know a lot of places haven't even ordered it because it's just been so cold. So it's legally it can be applied in accordance with the GMP now. Fortunately, I've only seen 2 places applying so far in the spots that we've checked, and they were doing some fertilizer into some beds that they were mulching. Not ideal, but it wasn't a direct lawn application. Both those areas were actually outside of the harbor watershed, so that was kind of encouraging that people are really actually starting to think about the order of things that they're doing and trying to stay away. Hopefully things are starting to sink in a little bit as far as checking soil temperatures and listening to the guys that are doing a little bit of extra time to get there to help let everyone know when's a better time to apply. So that's kind of ongoing. We do have enforcement personnel out checking for licenses, what's going out on the ground, and what's in trucks and doing those things. Like you said, I mean, it's the second day. I've probably checked about 20 to 25 crews, most of which just have trash cans and things, but just to stop and say hello and ask and take a look at the truck. Most of them are pretty familiar faces at this point, so it's been pretty good. But those licensure classes have been going. We've been doing a class every Thursday for the last 5 weeks now. And we've had a lot of attendees to that. So we're doing one more class this Thursday, and then we're switching to kind of our every 2-week schedule into May, and then we'll do kind of one a month for June and July, just for coming on visas, people getting out of school that are working, just to pick up any stragglers. We're really both of them get licensed in March and April for most of the crews. So that's been going well. Anything else here? I'm sure I'm missing something.
How do you reach out to the landscapers? As you mentioned about the soil.
So we send them out. We have a pretty extensive email database at this point. We reach out to all of them and just say to everyone that we have, this is where we are. If you have questions about whether your license is still valid or not valid, this is who to contact. And then just as we get closer, we started out by sending the first email, sent the schedule in January out to the group and said, this is the schedule for licensure this year. If you have questions about a license or you need it picked up, here's the procedure to sign up, these are the dates we're going to have it. And then for February, we sent out another one just saying, hey, first class is coming up soon, people need to get registered. And then in March, I know we sent out a couple of separate reminders, one pointing people towards the Land Council did a really nice pesticide workshop a couple weeks ago that we drive traffic to say this is going on. If you need continuing ed credits for a pesticide license or just pointing some information. And also, if you're looking for fertilizer, this is it. And then we sent out one further one. But we get a lot of good feedback. We know we don't catch everybody. In this day and age, it's harder and harder to find physical mailing addresses for a lot of the companies. A lot of them used to have PO boxes and things that we get a lot of letters back. Email works the best. And then amongst the community of landscapers themselves, they're pretty good about reminding each other. They have kind of, especially the larger companies, have kind of taken a stance where they know that they all kind of have to work together to stay compliant, to not talk about worse options from their perspective. And they do a pretty good job. We get a lot of reports too from people. We get a lot of reports about, we're worried about these guys, could you give them a call? There's a lot of people that just call in. But we definitely try to reach as many as we can. And anytime we see a crew that, when we check them for fertilizer, says, I've never heard about it, we all carry sign-up sheets, informations. Here's where you can find further information. If you're looking for a copy of the BMP or the rules, just so they know. And then we always log anytime we have that interaction with them to say, we talked to Peter Brace Landscaping today. They said they didn't have any information on fertilizer. That way we can either follow up with them, or if we run into them again on another inspection, if we get the what we didn't know, we can say, well, we talked to you 2 weeks ago, and you said that then, and we didn't go with this information. You chose not to do it, so here's the consequences of it. So we try to keep pretty good logs and just try to stay and so there's admittedly a million landscapers down here, and there are new ones every year. And there's ones that are going to start up new businesses tomorrow and the next day, and some will pop up, and it's difficult to catch all of them for info purposes, but we try.
Are the training videos in use? The ones that we were the fertilizer and we were
yeah,
working
so we
on?
started those. We're using the field class from last year. We've had a lot of really good feedback. We definitely have to do some voiceover work on some of it, and then we'd like to add on some additional components. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback on the section that talks about calibration of spreaders. A lot of people didn't know how to do it correctly. Is a nice way to put that. And now we've had 2 crews that have come down in the last month down to our parking lot at Jenny's to just sweep up some fertilizer, but to do it, which we've never had before, so that's good. So I think people are catching on, so now it's going to be a year of having to do a lot, probably more enforcement than normal, because everyone's kind of bought in, and I think everyone that's complying needs to see that their compliance is rewarded with actually making sure that we're training the people that are not compliant. And then also, we've had a fair amount of homeowners call and things that people are checking in, and homeowners are starting to ask questions about it. And I talked to Steve from Ernst today, and he said a number of people that have asked him in the last year, why did my lawn look great on Memorial Day? And he explains the BMP and the purpose of it, and they're like, well, that's awesome, I had no idea. Thank you for doing that. And he's like, the lawn will look great when you're here, but before then, you gotta let us have time to do it correctly, and the results will be there. It's like we haven't lost a single client, no one has said that's crazy, everyone's been pretty good. So it's been a program that's been booming, and it's getting better. It's still room to improve, but it's definitely a better situation than we were 2 years ago and 5 years ago, and back when the Article 60 acre first came out. So it's getting closer.
You've got a lot of irons in the fire, Jeff.
Well, we got a lot of people now. I mean, it's a lot different
Yeah.
than when Peter was on shad when natural resources first started. It was just terra and high. Now we have a whole army of people, and the Board of Health has a whole army of people that kind of help them out. And, the Board of Selectmen, really since the first start of talking about getting a water quality person, I can't remember the last year the Board of Selectmen didn't have one of their primary goals being water quality and improving water quality. And that's, we only do what we're asked to do and have time to do it. It's nice to have support come in. It doesn't sound like writing by Christmas night to everybody, but a lot has changed since 2010 where, Great Harbiaco contributes a lot of money. The Land Council puts a lot of money into this. The general population is a lot more aware of these issues. I mean, it's a lot different than what it used to be 10 years ago. I mean, it's busy. I mean, it's nice to have a lot of items required. It's nice to have a lot of resources at your disposal to do it. So hopefully that only continues to go that direction. I know it's not forever, but at least a lot of time.
Do we, through you, Mr. Chairman, I know today was the last day of the extended scallop season.
Correct.
Do you have any sense of how many bushels total for the season?
I did until the extension came in. I know right before the extension, Joe's going to kill me for guessing at this. I want to say we were just shy of 13,000 before the extension, which is good. So we'll see what the extension brings. So all those guys owe. Everyone is kind of good to date to get their license. They have to provide catch reports. Everyone was really current, and then the extension came in, so we're waiting for the last 10 days. I mean, there wasn't a ton of guys that went during that 10 days. It's not like November when there are 30 or 40 boats out on the water. There's just a handful of them. So there may be a few hundred bushels more. So we'll wait to see what that gets in, and hopefully for the next meeting, they're never exact, but we'll have a much closer total to what we believe came out of the water. So but we were right around there.
That's good.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, last year we were like 4,500 to 5,000, depending on each math we used. So that's really good. I mean, it's interesting to see though. We get a lot of reports that guys are getting tons of seed, and seeing a lot of seed, which is always concerning. But sometimes they have a magic way of finding spots where guys are fishing or getting there. It can be small. So we'll have to wait and see what that brings. But it looks like this season, at least compared to recent ones, is pretty successful. And it's encouraging after a year where it was so bad to have a year that's seemingly much better. So hopefully it continues in that trend.
Awesome.
Good news, Jeff.
I would love to build last year over 1 million bushels in a year to cut through. So that's one way to it.
Has there been anything through your office that you could share with us on any updates on dredging, maintenance dredging?
No, I haven't really heard. I'll be honest, maintenance dredging is pretty far off my radar right now with all of the fun going on with not harbor related things like condo things.
We'll ask Sheila when she comes in.
Elections and town meeting. Maintenance dredging is pretty low on the list to follow up, but I'll keep the fingers on it and try to get back to you with what may or may not be going on for when this stuff's going to happen. I do know that the Harbor Master Office is putting in for an extension on their Conservation Commission permit for the maintenance dredging around the floating dock at the town pier, because that permit is getting ready to expire in September. They're going to put in for it because they want to make sure they have enough time. But I think it's their intention to get started before then. But it would be really awful to get started and the permit expire and would have to re-permit it. So I think we're just being cautious. Maybe that's a guesstimate, but I know that also is related to some of the driver and the delay on that relates to the potential replacing of the floating dock and those repairs. But that replacement system is going to dimension out to be and how it's going to sit. may impact the dredge footprint. So we'll have to see how that goes. But that still has to get permitted and dealt with, so that may be pushing that a little bit. So we'll see. I know they'd like to address that sooner than later and get that facility back up to 100%. They have some things to do.
Any questions for Jeff from the board?
Well, I guess I'm not sure this is the right spot for it. Somebody called me last summer when there was a fairly noticeable fish kill, I gather, and it was like 3 days later, so whatever was there had been either been eaten or washed away. So, Jeff, would your office be the place for me to send people to report things like that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Definitely are. It's usually for any sort of out of the blue that's evident, fish kills, anything that seems abnormal, direct them to us. And if one of us isn't kind of the primary person for it, then that is.
Okay, great. Thanks.
But anything. So, our water quality person really specializes in algae and phytoplankton. But fish kills are usually pretty easy to track down the source of what the fish kill was. And that's kind of with her. But you can definitely find this.
I think
goes
that.
for ponds.
Yeah. Okay.
Any water body. We'll have
Great.
to take a look.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
I'm all set.
Public
No.
comment?
Okay.
Not seeing any. I'm sorry, Fritz?
No, I'm
Okay.
good.
Oh, just real quick to add on to that, I don't mean to interrupt anything.
No, please.
If you do have a report from somebody, you're getting one, if you could get a really clear location from them, we tell a lot of people if they have their smartphone on them to just get on their map and drop it in so they know where they are, because we get a lot of calls of people using names of places, especially in the summer, and the place they think they are isn't the place that they're really at. So as much refined information, if you can take a picture and show us where you are, like a bigger landscape picture, that's helpful, because it really stinks to get a call from someone telling you that they're at Hummock Pond, which happened last year, and they were really at Long Pond, but they were confused, and then we ended up going to a spot, and they were like, that's fantastic, what's the problem? And then we found out that they were not what they said they were. So if you can get really clear locations, it's helpful.
Okay.
All right, moving on into new business. And Jeff, if there's something here you'd like me to take out of order, I'd be more than glad to. Staff attendance brought up by Joe, who's not here. I think you guys are pretty good personally about getting here when you can. We realize your schedules are busy, as is Sheila tonight. But I'll certainly give Joe the opportunity to speak on this. Unless you'd like to say something, I'll move on.
No, I just say, man, we would definitely try to get there, and we definitely,
Yeah.
if there's something specific you guys are looking to talk about in advance that's more geared towards shellfish or biology or shellfish production or water quality, and we're more than happy to arrange for Tara or Caitlin or Leah or whoever to be here to talk about something specific. We try to cover as much as we can as much as possible. So, we don't miss on purpose.
So moving forward, mounting of scallop boxes, had a few comments made from some scallopers, and if they really wanted to make comments, they'd be here tonight with it being on the agenda. But I took it upon myself to talk to the environmental police officer, whom I was told was present for some of these notices that the boxes being crowned a little too far. He gave me a wonderful explanation of what he observes. Didn't get involved in any violation notices, just simply observed JC. Feels that JC is very lenient, and there's there's a noticeable line being crossed, I guess, by some fishermen who want to push the crowning abilities. And so I've just mulled through my head a lot. Should we, change this to they're met by a stick at the dock every day and they're level boxes, or just keep on going as we're going, only because I like to solve problems. But it seems as though after speaking with the environmental officer, JC's handling things well, and he's maybe having his limits pushed at times by a chosen few, let's put it that way. So
mounting is the age-old question of scalding, or what's legal or not. And it's just challenging. I mean, it's something that, I think everyone understands that you get a little bit on top that you're making your good shape. I mean, I've gone out with JC and with Officer Briganti, and I think they're both pretty fair about it. And they usually give everyone an opportunity to say, hey, give them a shake, let them settle in and see what is there. I know in the past we've sprayed boxes with boards, and that is received in a very unpopular tone. But it's forever going to be something that's difficult, and it's always something that the next guy feels like he's getting away with, his next door neighbor's getting away with more than he is every time, and it's always tough. Is it that far, that far? The ones I've seen where you end up seeing boxes get sprayed are ones where there's no question that there's not even an attempt to be a level box. I usually think it's pretty good myself. I think that both officers, JC and Mark, do a really good job dealing with it. It's something that is inherently subjective if no one wants to spray boxes. Forever be like it's the easy target for controversy. The grass is always greener in the next guy's field.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of scallop or envy, and it's, they shouldn't fall off when you pick up the box, in any sense. But as terms of actual number of scallops, it depends a lot on where you're fishing. If you've got a lot of limpets or those jingle shells, you can use up a lot of volume without getting that much of a catch. If there's growth, it's, the size of the scallops. There's so many variables. I think it's, it sounds like the enforcement's doing a good job of trying to keep things reasonable. So
between the five of us too, the fact that people are complaining about it is usually an indication to me that the wardens are doing at least a decent job, because people are feeling like they're getting asked and checked on it. And I know that sounds awful to say that. As someone who supervises them, I'd like to get complaints about what's going on for stuff like this, because it tells me that they're doing their job. I know that sounds strange to have that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Great perspective, yeah.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
You're never going to make them all happy. So.
Yeah. Well, I was certainly more than comfortable with the explanation I was given, and it soothed any questions I had in my mind, for sure. Any other questions for Jeff on that subject? Okay.
I'm all set.
Just a thought that's been run by, whereas we've had difficulty with making a quorum sometimes, proposing an alternate board member. I'm not quite sure how this would work if somebody wants to move forward with at least finding out some information on this. I don't mind finding out myself.
Yeah, I don't know whether there's a requirement for some bylaw to provide for it. I mean, I know in the planning board there's provisions of state law that provide for it, so it's regulated in that way, but I don't know where you have a local advisory board, whether it's just simply at the discretion of the Board of Selectmen or whether it's something more is required. I'd be happy to look into it, but I'm trying to figure out who I guess through either the selectman's office or the clerk's office, one or the other ought to have some take on that. But If you want me to, I'd be happy to, if you want to do it.
Sure, no, please.
Okay.
That would be great. Jeff?
Okay.
When I saw this on the agenda, I looked at it briefly. I wasn't able to find another advisory board that have alternate members. I don't know. How
HTC?
Well, their HTCs are regulatory boards.
member.
Ah,
So most boards that have alternate members are regulatory boards where occasionally people have conflicts and have to sit off of applications so they can bring in alternate members. But I've never seen it in an advisory board. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I don't think it's commonly done. So it may take some doing to figure out the procedure for it, just because it's something that isn't common. Someone may not know off the top of their head whether it would be like, is that something that can be an appointed position through the selectmen? Would it have to be elected like you guys are to the board?
Yeah.
How the dynamics of that would work? How if they were here today, would they be sitting in place of an absent member? Those things would have to get worked out, but I haven't seen that side. It'd be interesting to see what the result is.
But it's definitely, it's a good idea because we've had, since I've been on the board, we've had a lot of times when people aren't here. And Bill is always fishing. And nothing against him for that. But, this year alone, I think we've missed probably 3-4 meetings. And if we'd had that alternate member, we could activate him and then we'd be all set. So.
The other option that's terrible is it sounds that I've seen in other advisory situations where they have trouble making quorum on occasion. We actually just saw it at town meeting for the agricultural commission, is they reduced their number from, the agriculture, not the ag commission, there's another one that went from like 9 to 5, which is too many. The ag commission just went down from 7 to 5 to help with that issue. Sometimes it's just tough, and they just, if you have 4 or 5, you can get 3 people there. So that may be, as awful as it sounds, another option if it's something that's a continual issue. Alternate members on a choice, working with the number of people on the board is another choice to at least fully vet out all your options. It just seems to be that those people who may be interested or involved by having fewer seats.
Okay. Well, I suppose to update the board, because also part of this has been since September, since we've missed Mr. Kuntz. And I just found out today that he is able to attend our meetings. I've reached out to him to no answer, no response. So
He is able to attend, or he's here?
I was told he's able to attend the meetings. Whether he's on island or not, I'm not sure. But he's not incarcerated.
Okay.
So I've reached out to him and welcomed him back and have not had any response. And I've also sent him a message, if he's not able to attend, could he please submit a letter of resignation. So if I could obtain an actual mailing address for him, then I'd be glad to draft a letter with approval from the board to do so also. Ask him to either begin attending again or submit a letter of resignation. And that would certainly help us move forward and gain a quorum a little easier.
When you say he's able to attend, does that mean he's off island, but he could come here and go to the meeting, or? Okay, never mind.
It means he's not being held anywhere where he's not able to attend.
Okay.
As far as the police department knows.
Okay.
I reached out to Deputy Chief Gibson
Okay.
today. Not knowing any other way to find out.
Well, that would solve our problem. I mean, if he would attend the meetings, then we'd have that extra person. And while he was here, while he was attending meetings, he pretty much made every meeting.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, he was a wonderful participant when he participated, so.
but if he reaches out to you and expresses a desire to no longer be on the meeting, on the board, then we can go through the channels with the selectmen and get somebody appointed. You know, maybe we could encourage Mark Anderwall to, get on.
I agree. Fritz?
Yeah, I agree too.
I agree, yeah, because...
Do you need a motion?
The way it is right now, we have 7 members, and with 2 that are not here regularly, certainly, so that's 5, and you end up with 1 or 2 people, just like, for instance, the next meeting, I'm not going to be able, I'm off island for the next meeting. You just end up, it's pretty easy to drop below a quorum.
Yeah, Joe's off island today, Bill's on his boat, so, and Ken is not responding. If, Ginger, if you'd like to make a motion in advance to, once we receive a mailing address, that a letter can be written to Mr. Coates.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Like I said, I did see him. Pretty sure I saw him in the bike path, but
All right, another idea, which would really have to, ahead of time, have some scholopers who are interested in this. But just to try to keep the fishery alive for future generations, to propose a school-to-work program for students to be able to have some time on a boat, commercial scalloping. If anybody has any ideas of how to move forward with this, maybe this is more of a Shellfish Association thing, which I'll be glad to bring up at their next meeting, see if anybody's willing to.
so something that's maybe something that's less than, more rudimentary than the apprentice program that we have now for adults. Something that is more of the basics, is what you're saying.
Just to introduce them to the harbors, introduce them to a boat and a fisherman, and get them on board.
I think maybe do we know anybody at the school, or how this would work? How this would tie in with the school? I think that's been an issue with some things. That it needs someone connected with the school to be supportive of the idea.
Yeah.
One thing I might suggest is the Egan Maritime Institute. They've all but given up on publishing books and have focused all their energies on education. And I don't know how tied in they are to the schools.
That's
Aren't
good to
you on
know.
that board?
I'm the president.
Yeah. No, they're a good board.
That's what I was going to suggest. The Egan Maritime supports a full-time teacher in the 8th grade dealing with nautical-related education, which takes into account biology and other things. I don't know whether, but I could certainly bring that up. I know one of the things, it's referred to as the Sea of Opportunities program, and we did have an advisory, we still have an advisory group made up of a lot of people involved in various aspects of the maritime industry here. And one of the motivations, one of the goals, was to provide, I'm not going to call it, not a vocational program, but access to vocational education in terms of trying to introduce students and make them aware that there are opportunities in the maritime industry. So, for instance, through the program that we have, where high school students go out and on a week-long sail. We support that program now with using Lynx and one other boat. There are a number of I'll call them graduates from that program who have gone on to the Maritime Academy. and that's an example. Another example was to try to put people in contact with, or have people come in and talk about, could be ferry captains, all the things. It could run the gamut from engine maintenance to biology, that type of thing. So there's a specific program in the 8th grade, but the general focus of the Sea of Opportunities program at Egan is education in the middle school and high school related to maritime education and occupation. So I can see what we might be able to do in terms of integrating some sort of scallop initiative into that.
Jeff, before we go further, you might know something.
Well, I was just going to add in, I think to answer a question that's earlier, and I think you guys hit the nail on the head at a good spot to start with that, the Sea of Change program. You can be 14 years old and hold a full-fledged commercial license for any commercial fishing on Nantucket. So I think, thinking about 14-year-olds, I mean, you're really looking at freshmen in high school or older. So if that's an opportunity, I mean, I think that's something too where, I don't want to speak for the Board of Selectmen, but I think that would be something where you could obviously start in as, you would definitely count that time towards the regular apprentice program, towards your full license. But I think I'd be willing to, stand up there with folks from Egan and folks from the school and even talk about if someone enrolled in the program through the school, waiving that first year license fee for them to enroll in that program to try to get them started, and then say, year number 2, you got to pay the $250 to get your license, but you will at least earn that money in the first year, hopefully, to kind of get you there to help the kids get in. I think that may be, I don't think it's a way to entice people into the program, but I think that's a way to help with a little bit of initial support for some of those guys to say this is an opportunity. You got to identify fishermen that are willing to participate and take those guys and do it. But that may be a way to get there, or for someone to donate license fees for the kids that want to sign up to get that. But they can be licensed at 14, so that may be a big
I can think of one individual who is a scalloper and who has expressed to me the willingness to take anybody out. He's a very he works at the Nantucket Yacht Club in the summertime in the waterfront department, and so he's very much tuned into dealing with kids who are in sailing class and things like that. So he's pretty tolerant of young people and understanding what they want. So I'd be happy to talk to him to see whether there's something that, if he'd be willing to volunteer.
Would that be Harvey?
Yes.
Yep.
I think it's something.
I didn't want to. Yeah.
Something interesting too is when you think about the problem we've always had. We've participated in some of the school to work programs in our department before. Is depending on the kid's schedule, you can be very time restricted. And there were days when we were getting a student for like 30 minutes by the time they got to us and had to go back. And you're like, "What? Why are you bothering?" And you're like, "This is ridiculous." Because by the time they get there and get their instructions, it's time to leave. It doesn't work. But I think this will be interesting because if you start at 6:30, the very first dredge, you might even have an opportunity to be. I mean, guys even today were still landing full limit at 9 in the morning.
There was a tradition in the old days. My father and my uncle always went scalloping before school.
Yeah.
And even when they weren't in school, their mother made them come home for lunch. So they'd have to come in and then go back out again to get their limit. One of my concerns, if I can take the floor for a minute, is in the old days, I think kids learned to open first. So they opened scallops. If you needed help in the shanty, you just left the door open, and people would come in. And sometimes they just they'd open enough scallops to get to earn a 25-cent fee for the movies. So, this is a vastly different time, but people are still people, and I think it would be nice if we could, if some shanties are ready early. Maybe we could encourage some of the family scallopers who, like to go scalloping but don't necessarily want to sit there with scallop juice all over their hand. If they could, have a kid learn how to open scallops, and they'd get their scallops opened, and the kid would learn, and they probably wouldn't cut them any worse than the people do themselves. I don't know. If there'd be any interest in that.
You have to, either us or the Shellfish Association, or a combination of, and Egan, it would have to be, well, you have to come up with some sort of curriculum, some sort of, no?
It's a question of whether what you're really looking at. I mean, I was just thinking of Harvey because he just, he kind of just, he's out there and he's doing that, and he also drives the bus, right? So I think he does his scalloping in connection with when he's got to drive the bus.
Yeah,
so
he doesn't go out till after 8.
he seems like a natural. If you could get him to volunteer, or I don't know whether through the Shellfish Association, he could be compensated in some way if that helps him, do it. I don't know how Carl would feel about it. I mean, certainly Carl likes to take people out on his boat, but whether in the middle of scallop season that's anything he's interested in. But there are certainly two people that are very open and I think interested.
There's a lot of guys that fish alone, and so it's a matter of running it by these guys, and I'll be bringing this up next week at the NSA. So I'd like to continue to discuss it. It's in all of your minds, and I'd be willing to, once we've culminated something, that I'd be willing to go before Dr. Bucky. I believe the principal of the high school would be the one to speak with about this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I know there were at the Meet the Candidates, there were questions put to the two people who were participating for the who were running for the school board, and one of the questions from the audience related to vocational type education, and was there a place for more of that? And I think the answer to that was that both of those people, and I think both of them, one of them was elected, was supporting that. So I get the sense that probably the board might, support that, but again, it needs the help and support of the local people. I know for our program in the middle school, Dr. Cohen is very much behind it and on board with it. Superintendent's on board with it. So if you want me to look into whether that, I think the Egan thing would be more a question of integrating it into some sort of a curriculum, which is less, but that's more pure, more education driven as opposed to vocation driven. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't do trips, school trips, and things like that they do.
well, a mixture of both would be the healthiest.
Yeah, I'll bring it up, and we'll see where we go.
You get to look at a lot of different features of the scallop when you're opening them. You could tie in with the biology.
The biology of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that certainly makes sense, Ginger.
My grandchildren were fascinated when they went through the hatchery. Just seeing things going on and understanding what some of the biology was. And I have a program at home for teaching them how to open scallops.
As in they do
They're
it.
not quite proficient at it yet, but anyway.
All right, moving on. instilling a cohesiveness, a commercial-based scallop fishery, and what my thoughts on this were, having talked to several scallopers recently about how competitive it is on the water between some scallopers, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to somehow reach out to them that and convince them that together they're an industry and they're not individuals. So one thing I was glad to hear was that there's pretty much of a silent agreement between them all that they don't leave the last guy out there alone. And I hope that is the case, because I know my dad spent the night in '76 out there in Nantucket, and his boat, he was the last guy out there, his engine failed, and everybody was gone. And actually the last guy came up to him, he said, pulling my last dredge and heading in, but then his motor quit just as the last guy was out of sight, and the next day it was too cold to go out. And back then he used bags, he covered himself with grain bags, and just about froze to death.
I can imagine.
Where did he end up?
Sorry?
His motor kicked out. Where did he end up?
Well, he was afraid he was going to be pulled out with the tide between Esters and Tucking Up.
Yeah.
And he said he threw every dredge overboard. He had 2 anchors out, and smoked his last cigarette at 8 o'clock and had his last beer at 9 o'clock, and shivered the rest of the night, hoping to hear an engine pull up. And the harbor master allowed 3 guys to go out and look for him the next morning, even though it was too cold to go out. So he was brought in, but he was never the same. He was constantly chilled.
Yeah.
But it certainly sunk in on him, and he was really never the same after that. So and Millie knew he wasn't in. So there was recognition on shore that he hadn't made it in, but it's about as far as it went. So here, this is another thing I think I'll bring up at NSA, and I'd like to continue it in case, another thing to throw around in your minds if you have any ideas of how to, reach out to the scallops in a better way and get them to understand that together they're an industry, and a lot of us rely on them and enjoy the results of it.
Well, it's something that goes into the whatever mailing that the Natural Resources Department sends out every year. That's it's just a card that's is on the water etiquette and safety, something that is pretty much reminding people you are a fishery. You're not just one person, and keep an eye out. And like they say in the airports, if you see something, say something, and keep an eye out on the boats that are in your area. And if it looks like you're one of the last people to go in, then keep an eye out who might be last. And as you come in, tell one of the wardens, I saw so and so. I saw Andy Lowell. He was way up in Fifth Bend, and it's 4 p.m. and it was rough, or it was blowing that day or something.
Do scallopers, the charter fishing fleet, I think, chats back and forth by radio, but do the scallopers, they may not even, do they have radios on board other than cell phones? And do they chat back and forth?
A lot of them are using GPS now, and certainly they have their cell phones with them. Radios, probably a thing of the past, but I'm not sure.
You don't see a lot of.
Never heard of such a thing.
Yeah.
Well,
I've never seen a scallop boat outfitted with one.
Well, scalloping is you're constantly dripping with salt water and guts and mud and sand, and that really does tend to play havoc with electronic equipment.
Most of them carry cell phones, and I will say, usually at the end of the day, more than such, we know what everyone drives. I think it's one of the reasons on the application form we always ask for vehicle information, which shanty you go to. Not because we want to be nosy, but it's that way when we drive by, F Street Pier at 4:45. and you see a black Chevy 2500 that's sitting there, you can say, well, that's who that is. Is their boat there? Where's their boat? And if it's not there, you don't see them. Call them on the phone, and see what's going on. And I know we've had it this year where I know a couple guys got towed in, and it was partially because or got in touch with someone on the water or someone that was there, and someone made it back in. So it's something that we're kind of cognizant of, but it's something that can always be better. I think their cohesiveness, if I can say a minute, would serve them well. And this is an issue that's probably better for the Shellfish Association, their cohesiveness for when things happen that are potentially effective to their industry, like sewer break that gets into the harbor, and having a discussion that the government isn't necessarily participant in, or nor should we be, but to really talk about the effects and saying the biology behind it says you can go because the Division Ring Fishery says it's okay. Should we be going because that's the best choice for our industry right now? And that's discussions that those guys have to participate in and have to do, because it's no secret looking at this year that after the sewer break, the price dropped substantially and didn't go back up for those guys. And I will be the first to also say the town has no want or business being involved in the economics of fishing, because it's a horrible idea. But it's something that there was a lot of dissension between fishermen, and I've seen fishermen confront other fishermen since then for things like, why did you go? You ruined how much money I was making because you went. And it was divisive amongst a lot of the guys that fished. And that hurts them in the long term. I mean, again, a little bit of soapboxing for me, but they need to be united as a group for big events like that, because it damaged more than the guys in Nantucket Harbor, because the guys in Nantucket felt the same hurt with the price drop from 14. The lowest I heard someone get down to at one point was under 10. And then it finally held kind of steady at 11 through the rest of the season. But it was a significant impact to what they were getting. And it's something that, I'm not saying it could have been avoided, because there are a lot of other factors for scallop prices, like people getting them on the vineyard or on the Cape. But certainly having an event like that take place, I mean, if I lived on the vineyard, I'd be the first one selling that would say, well, you don't want to buy Nantuckets because they're not good. Even though the DMF is saying, well, we don't have grounds to close it because of these reasons. It's a perception thing. But that's, to me, that's a bigger issue than, they're pretty good about, like you said, last guy off knows he's the last guy off, and they go in, and I see it all the time, they go in pairs, and the last ones that come in, and they say they're in. And I'll say the oyster guys do it too. When they're on their leases, they'll call and say, hey, he went out today, he didn't come back and told us yet, and it's dark. You might give them a call. We've had that happen. But they have things that affect their industry that they don't work together on. That's totally, I would say, that is also totally outside of my job as natural resources person, but it's what I see and it's what I hear them write about sometimes, and it's something that we can't address for them, but they need some help to do those kind of things.
Well, do you think if the closure had lasted, say, another 10 days, 2 weeks, if everybody had just stopped and then after Clean Harbors came, said, okay, it's okay now, that it would have been more believable than just, what the paper said was that you could eat them because you're only eating the adductor muscle, but the opener should worry about the juice. That was not really reassuring. That's just playing into the ick factor there.
Yeah, part of that came out because the Department of Public Health in the state put out a comment about use caution in handling those things, because know necessarily where they've come from, and I understood where that come from, but that damaged the brand of scallops.
No question.
That is something that, I guess the question that would need to be asked is something where you say, if the fishermen decide, well, the state's not closing it because of reasons that they don't have legal grounds to close it, is it a better decision for us to take a week or take 2 or 3 days or take 10 days, whatever it turns out to be, and say, we are not going to go because we want to make sure everything's clean, and instead of that, we're going to invest our energy and we're going to go to the Board of Selectmen and start petitioning the Division of Marine Fisheries to ask for a 10-day extension at the end because we weren't able to go these 10 days, and put out the message that we're concerned about putting out the highest quality scallop that we can, and these are the steps that we take to do it. You'll never be able to answer that question. I mean, but to me, hindsight being 20/20, as an outsider, the fact that there were two very separate camps amongst the fishermen before, you'll never get them all, but it was divisive, and some of the comments that you saw back and forth between the guys that fish that were in disagreement led to some unpleasant conversations and that's something that hurts all of them in the long run, and it's something where I hope we don't talk about a 2.5 million gallon sewer leak again, but let's face it, there's going to come a day where something potentially catastrophic is going to take place again, where there's going to be a big impact to a fishery, that those same kinds of questions are going to come up. And having at least a forum or some sort of discussion as a group before it's just decided, I think is something where it should probably take place. And here's is a decent forum, but I'm not sure that you guys want to be involved in worrying about marketing and economics and those kinds of things, because you're not really in your purview as much. But
It's well covered at the NSA.
yeah, I think it's the perfect home. Like the Sea of Change is the perfect home for in the high school program. It's there. They're more involved in that. They spend a lot of time framing those things that, to me, when you think about cohesiveness in the bay scallop fishery, those are the things that come up, that the lack of cohesion really seems to rear its head.
Well, since, are you...
I'm done.
Okay. Since the sewer issue has come up, I have another thing that I wanted to mention, which was that the... Okay, so as you all know, I own a building on North Wharf in which I keep the scallop shanty, which my family has had since 1905. And the tide came up onto the wharf. In the rack line, there was, pretty much everything that came out of the sewer was in the rack. Because North Wharf is considered private, the DPW and the Clean Harbors didn't clean it up. So I had to pick up the condoms and the rubber gloves and the things that people flush down out of the rack line. And then they put the boom up in Easy Street, but then they've left the boom there. I don't know if it's still there, but it was until fairly recently. So bits of shredded boom, fluff are washing up in the rack under the building. So that's not good either. I mean, it's all very well to catch the oil, but unless you take it away, you don't, it's not doing any good to have it shredded in the thing. Now, you can read the sign on the private sign at North Wharf that says Chapter 91 access, permitted by 310 CMR, whichever one it is. It seems to me that cleaning up a spill of that kind should be, one of the big, what's the word I want? They shouldn't say, oh no, private property. If it has to be cleaned up by professionals, they should clean it up wherever it is.
That's interesting, because there were spots that they definitely did. I'll definitely look into that, because that's something where...
Well, I took a handful to the sewer department, and Mr. Gray said he'd send him an email, but it was still there several days later. So.
No, I'll definitely follow up on that because that's interesting because we definitely had areas clean that were not necessarily directly in like a public way from it. So I'll definitely follow up on that because we're trying to make sure that if there was something that was missed, again, if something like that happens again, that the same things aren't missed. So I'll definitely.
Well, there were also two or three bags of, big plastic bags of, I don't know if I think they were unused booms that washed up because they hadn't secured their material properly.
Interesting. No,
Yeah.
I definitely. Do you have any pictures of that?
No, my camera and my computer and I are still fighting, and it's enough to deal with without having to take pictures of it too.
All right. Well, I'll definitely follow up because that's something where sometimes stuff comes free from other spots, but I'll definitely figure out what happened there and get back to you because that's stuff that I know they were trying to track down all of the spots that were affected to get it clean, and we'll have to see why that spot was specifically missed.
Well, I'm right there in the corner, and that's where everything washes up.
Yeah.
Those booms, I saw them when I got off the boat yesterday. They're yellow, right?
Yeah.
And they're plastered against the bulkhead, or they're attached or something.
Yeah, those got put in again at the request of DEP, and I'm not sure why they're still in because that fuel tank that was causing that issue has apparently been addressed. So I was under the belief that they should have been out. So I'll follow up with Rob.
Well, now they're just shredding and going into the harbor.
All right. Well, we'll sort that out. Figure out something about Rifle that DEP and see why they're still there, and why they're not good repair.
Well, Jeff, just to back up a little, you've once again impressed me having description of Scollopers pickup trucks and their license plate numbers on record. That's
We get a lot of complaints every year for renewals and filling out paperwork. Why do you need all of this stuff? And then we explain to them that this is why, and then no one ever goes, why? They don't.
boy,
We
to
get
me,
more of a, I'm buying a new car. I don't know what it's going to be, but you know.
it just makes so much sense. I mean, if you're there at the dock, like you say, at 5 o'clock, you see a truck there and the boat's not there.
I mean, if you really want to be impressed sometime, if you catch JC, just start with the list of fishermen, and off the top of his head, he will tell you, he's like, Carl Schilling drives a silver GMC with a Norwegian flag bumper sticker and the wood rack in the back, and he'll do it for everyone that fishes. It's unreal.
Good for him.
So
Good.
it's stuff that's good, and he knows too. We know where a lot of the guys open. So if someone hasn't turned up, but someone not answering the phone, you can check in at the shanty and say, "Hey, if you guys see Smitty, does he come in?" And if they say, "Hey, he was here 30 minutes ago," you're like, "Oh, all right, well, there's no problems. He's in." If you get the no, we haven't seen him, then you can start saying, "Well, let's call Melinda. Melinda hasn't heard from him. Let's call here." I mean, they all have their circles they run in. We try to get information, so if there is an issue, we can get a hold of people quickly and sort out where they are.
I can remember when Tara suggested some time ago that she wanted to, somehow be able to pull up alongside while they're fishing and ask, what are you getting? What are you bringing up? And I thought, what a wonderful idea, so she could have, be up to date, up to speed on what they're bringing up. But the capabilities of doing that, bothering them while they're working, but what a perfect time just for a little, 2-minute drive-by. And if she's still interested in doing that, I had suggested back then that I'd be glad to go along with her and break the ice with some of these guys so they don't think she's being nosy or asking too much information.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, just to say, we'd like to do is we'd like to get all of our hatchery staff and our biology staff a couple days out on a boat each season, kind of going forward, and kind of rotate through guys, because it's, I don't know, the couple times that I've done, I get a lot more information, not necessarily seeing what they're taking up. Well, that's wonderful information. Just spending 4 or 5 hours with them singly, a lot more questions, and so I see what their concerns are, and, I always learn something while you're out there. Just listen to this. I won tell the story of when they were, little and going. We used to stand on burlap sacks and pack them in as tight as we could, or, went out with one of the guys once, and, a lot of the guys just dumped into the box, and he was very neatly stacking scallops into his box, and he's like, I get 40 more scallops than everyone else does because I put them in neatly and carefully. It takes me a little longer, so instead of getting to the dock at 10, I get to the dock at 12, but I also I'm going to come in with almost an entire extra box just because I carefully put them in. It's totally different, but you see all these different things, and you get a lot of different stories and knowledge. I mean, none of these guys are, a lot of them have been doing it for a long time. It's just fascinating to go through kind of the knowledge of it. So it's good. It's something that we're going to try to do more of.
Well, you also get to see all the juvenile flounder, the blenny, whatever's down there comes up in the dredge. So it is an interesting sample.
And it's also good. It gives us, as cheesy as it sounds, it gives us a nice connection to the people that we are relying upon for a lot of information about where we do larval releases or where we're seeing water quality issues or things that are there. The fishermen are really a critical piece to that because they're the ones that see it all the time. They're the most knowledgeable source for what's going on in the water this time of year, more so than anybody. They're not getting younger. You don't want to lose that on the way, so it's nice to get out there and have that. And it's also nice too to call it in the summer and say, hey, we can use a hand. You already have a relationship with everybody to kind of help. So something that we're going to try to do a bit of before starting next season. Now that building renovations are done and what kind of help the folks back to start doing it again. I told Tara she's not allowed to fish with her husband. She's got to do all this stuff. So,
All right. Well, that certainly sounds like something that goes all along hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder with, trying to instill this cohesiveness between the fishermen. So maybe with a joint effort, along with the NSA and any new ideas that may come up over the next 2 weeks here that can be forwarded to NSA, we can break some ground and make some headway. Moving on. Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board's jurisdiction, or really just wondering a concern regarding species. And now with the opening of Maya Comet Pond, I guess it was noticed some herring coming in, and what effects that may have. Your take on all of this would be certainly respected and enjoyed.
I guess if that's a question for me, I'll try to answer. I don't necessarily know if you guys have direct jurisdiction on.
Well, I don't think
the
that was
ponds.
the right word to be used here, but just our concerns should be.
I think if the Board of Selectmen asked you guys to look into an issue related to water quality or shellfish health for the Great Ponds, I don't really think that would be outside of your scope. But I think as far as ponds and pond opening go, it's definitely a discussion that I think needs to be had a little bit more. There are some serious, we've dodged the bullet so far with Maya Comet Pond, but there could be some serious biological effects by taking a pond that's typically between 0.1 parts per thousand and 0.5 parts per thousand salt water, like Maya Comet Pond, and getting a really heavy inflow of salt water into that system can be extremely hazardous to everything living in that pond. Dodged the bullet a little bit that our saltwater levels do get too high in that pond. Never really left. The good news is that the inputs into that pond are so high that we saw a little bit of a spike down in the southern end. We got up to close to 1. But the flow didn't really get back in too much. If it were open under different weather conditions, that may be different. We have a pretty good inflow into Hummock Pond, into Sackage Pond, And those ponds show it in their water chemistry. You know, you look at a pond like Sacajah, and its salinity levels can be, 17 to 20 parts per thousand, where seawater is at 32 or 33. So it's very salty compared to Mayacamet, so we can handle that saltwater exchange. The species that are in there reflect those species. You see it in everything that uses those ponds. I mean, from fish to the birds that are there, you see different species of ducks from pond to pond, and ones that go saltwater to freshwater more. I mean, just in observing, you can go out there just 2 days ago, there was a pretty good charge of surf scoter and white-winged scoter on Sacajah Pond. I've never seen scoters on Mayacamet Pond in any significant number, ever. Interesting, but it's related to, food and availability and those things that are there. They're definitely very different pond-wise, and you see those by what's there. Opening it for flood relief is interesting, but I think the better discussion to have is when we're looking at these areas that we're having continual problems, have we set up areas to fail by allowing improper drainage or undersized drainage to deal with surface water runoff? Have we not done everything we could to prevent basements from being constructed in areas of groundwater and high groundwater? Probably not. And that's where we start to see problems. I mean, I asked the homeowner last week who came in and was talking about, all of the mold on their walls and things that they were concerned with. That wasn't in my pond watershed. It was in a different watershed altogether, but they were asking me about it. And I asked them that question. I said, when you built your house, you dug your foundation hole, did they install a pump to pump water out before you poured your concrete? Yes. And I said, how often do you see that on an island? All the time. And I said, do you think them running a giant pump and pumping water out of the hole all the time before they poured the concrete, that when they poured the concrete and took that pump out, once it was all in and backfilled, what do you think happened with the water? And they said, well, it would come back. And I said, exactly. And when that water comes up again, you get another 2 feet. It doesn't take much for water to find its way in. And I said, this is the problem, is we haven't done a good enough job in our impacted watersheds in helping people make good decisions for their homes and for their roads. And we're behind in doing that. And you get watersheds like Mayacamet that are extremely developed and kind of at the center of development, where we haven't provided anyone any means to succeed in dealing with this for all this time. I mean, it's no secret that, the Mass neighborhood has flooding issues in their basements. There's no secret that some of the other areas have issues, but you talk to people that live along the edge of the pond. Just talked to Richard Wright last week, and he's like, it doesn't happen for me. But they also don't have full basements under one of their structures and other things because he knew the groundwater was going to be an issue. So we could do a better job. The Concom has some regulations for separation to groundwater for 2 feet, but a lot of these areas are not within the jurisdiction of the Concom. And that's an issue. When you go to an area like First Way, it's right over here, where a lot of it is outside of the jurisdiction, and you look for how they manage surface water runoff, there's nothing. There's no management of what happens with any of it, and it all ends up running into the swale behind First Way and the high school ball fields. And when groundwater is at plus 2 feet, you're just out of space for all this water to go. So you run out. And opening a pond gives some temporary relief, but it's not really, really real. And that's, again, it's kind of soapboxy, but that's really where we've failed as a community to say we're pumping water like crazy, and you can go to half the construction sites you run into now, and everyone's pumping in dewatering, or dewatering to fill basements. But when you turn the pump off, the water's going to come down. Should we be doing that, or are there better ways to be doing it, or should we be making smarter decisions to deal with that instead of counting on, well, we're going to just open the pond and save the day? It's not a reliable management strategy to deal with problems like that. Unfortunately, it's just it's tough. It's tough for people to hear that. I've seen it a million times to say to someone, a full basement may not be an appropriate choice for you. And people are picturing, I have my house and my kitchen, living room, and dining room on the first floor, and my bedrooms on the second floor. And I'm going to have this wonderful finished basement, and I'm going to have a theater, or I'm just going to store stuff down there. Well, I'm sorry, you live in an area where groundwater's 3.5 feet below the surface. You have to know that if you dig that hole and you put it in there, you run a real risk of at some point the water being persistent all the time, eventually finding its way to where you don't want it to be. It's tough. It's a tough sell with people. It's tough to explain that. They may not get exactly what they're looking for when they're building a house or groundwater is high on it. It touches the ocean.
Well, as you know, Jeff, most of the foundations get dug in the fall, and our groundwater level has settled. I didn't realize. I mean, when you go anywhere from the Consu Spring area all the way down into the Brant Point area, yes, we see pumping. But I'm aware of a good amount, and I'm sure you are also, of some foundations that were created, the holes were dug, and it was bone dry.
Oh, absolutely.
I would only think that a contractor on the job who knows he's pumping to get the foundation poured would incorporate some type of system outside the foundation before they've backfilled.
Sometimes.
But
it's those things too. I mean, the problem that you run into with even some of these where the hole is bone dry is, this year I called Mark Willette on the phone, and I was just like, hey, what are you guys getting for your groundwater readings right now? And when the director of the water company says it's 2 feet higher than the 25-year average, and in the last 35 years of readings, we've never had a reading this high, that's scary numbers for groundwater to be that high. It just is. And if you think about the last 35 years on Nantucket, the amount of development that's gone on in spots, especially, that we haven't had those conditions come to be before. So you're going to see impacts that you've never seen. And in some cases, I totally get it. No reasonable person would have anticipated it. You're not seeing signs of groundwater in the soil because the plus 2 feet only happens once every 40 years or once every 50 years. That it's the extreme situation that you have. We could have done a better job preparing in advance to mitigate that circumstance from happening. And I don't want to beat on our infrastructure problem more than I have to, but we have a problem island-wide with infrastructure and infrastructure construction. That is something where we have to catch up. We have to do a better job in doing it. I think all of these effects are tough to deal with, but is it something where, and it's fine if it's the decision that's ultimately made by the community, is it worth risking the potential biologic health of a pond for something that we may have been able to plan better for, or something that is a circumstance that's a problem? And what's more important to the community? And that's a little bit of the question that we're kind of asking now is, well, what is it? Is it more important long-term biologic health, or trying to do a better job over here in planning and developing and making smart decisions, or if things are not adequate, finding a way to make them adequate? And it's kind of in my opinion, kind of the crossroads where we're at. So I'm
Well-
very preachy on this all the time, but
Yeah.
it's-
Our purview here isn't about basements really, or the groundwater level, I would imagine. We're more concerned with the ecology and the species, here at least, and certainly though, the problem is there, and hopefully some
Oh, no doubt.
resolution can be created. May I ask, will you be presenting at Selectmen's meeting tomorrow?
I will be there. I have lots to talk about, so.
Okay.
All kinds of fun
All
topics.
right.
But it's definitely something, I mean, I think we're looking at hosting a public forum related to ponds, kind of closer to the summer, to talk about some of those things, but, I think it's something that's on a lot of people's radar, and it's, we're starting to have talks about, do we need to update and do a better job in Concom regulations for some of these areas within jurisdiction? Do we need to work with, planning and zoning to have better standards for stormwater management and development? Probably. All those things continue to need to be updated to incorporate these things. Do we need to find a way, now that we have more impervious areas in these spots, and better ways to deal with water runoff? And I think the answer to these is yes. We can always do better. But how do we get there, and how can we implement it in the most efficient manner and most economic way as possible?
Sounds like a good topic for the revisions to the master plan. Revisions to the town master plan.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for that input.
Sorry for being so preachy. I just get to talk about that a lot.
Yeah, I bet. Any more questions from the board
No.
for Jeff? Recapping items for the next meeting. We'll continue just about everything. We'll go over this, Peter.
Well, just before we close, you mentioned herring in here, and I think there was a guy who made a proposal to the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative to do some research with herring, and although they decided not to fund it, I believe Mariah Mitchell is picking it up. So we should be getting some information about herring by the end of the season.
Have you heard them, Jeff, to be...
I know that the hearing proposal was, didn't go through the one, but I know there were a lot of people interested. And I know it's something that everyone's interested in. I know Caitlin in our office has been talking with some folks from the DMF about doing some work specific to Nantucket ditch related to herring as well. So I know there's a lot of interest in herring right now.
Well, we're still in our second 6-year moratorium on herring fishery, and I don't know if we've had any more. Is the state going to extend that? Do you know?
I would be willing to bet they will.
Yeah.
My gut feeling. Herring is still kind of down, so I have not suspicion that. you'll probably
Well, I don't think we're seeing anything like the numbers that we used to see, and I'm not even convinced that they're exactly the same species, whether they're the alewife or the blueback herring. But it would be
I
nice
think
to know.
I think it's something that I know we've talked a lot about doing work between Nantucket Harbor and Long Pond to see what's going through there. I've always wanted to do some herring work related to the pond openings, because that's the original basis for the pond openings was for the herring run. Because we're running into real issues with temperature and things for when we are opening ponds, and we're not timing them as much. Unfortunately, especially the Sackett Pond, the timing on that pond is related more now from permit to the arrival of pike and plover than it is to the arrival of herring. And I know there are times where that pond has been opened because it's turned into part of our water quality management strategy that I know that we have missed herring by weeks, just for the fact that it's outside of our permitted window, because they're either early or late, and we're really penned into April 1st through April 15th which is a tough weather time of year, but we can't get past April 15th because we can't get permission from U.S. Fish and Wildlife to potentially disturb plover habitat to open the pond. So it's one of those fine balances where you get a million different things competing for one spot.
Well,
certain spots win faster than others, so.
I hate to drag things out any longer, but there is, I mean, Long Pond is now tidal all the way into the North Head, which has been since the 80s, and the last winter was the first time I've actually seen the culverts completely drowned. You know, I'm not sure what the specific fresh salt balance the herring need, but it's definitely, the pond is much more brackish than it used to be when the herring were much more numerous. So I don't know if that's a factor.
Jeff, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I just mentioned that I will not be, I'll be off island for the May 1st meeting.
Yeah.
I'll try to get back to you.